I was away from the garden for about a week, but it turns out that it was doing just fine without me, and I came back to find this absolutely massive zucchini. I was so excited when I found this zucchini, and I thought that the best way to show some gratitude was to make it the star of this week's video. This first recipe is a zucchini and tomato tart with a tofu ricotta, which is actually the same recipe that I use in my pizza video, and if you haven't seen that one yet, go ahead and check it out. The first thing I'm gonna do is make my tart crust, and it calls for a cup and a half of all-purpose flour, a half a teaspoon of powdered sugar, and half of a cup of frozen butter. And I'm just gonna pulse that until it's looking almost like sand, and then I'm slowly gonna add in 6 tablespoons of ice-cold water. Using frozen butter and really cold water is one of the most important parts about making the crust, because it makes sure that the gluten doesn't develop as easily and that you get those nice flaky layers. So once the dough is just combined in the food processor, I'm gonna dump it out and form it together, collecting all those little pieces. It's kind of like Play-Doh for adults. I really don't want to play with the dough too much, otherwise it will get tough, so just when it's come together, I'm gonna wrap it up and put it in the fridge while I make my other ingredients. These tomatoes are also from my garden, so they tasted super fresh, and I just feel like growing your own food and seeing where it comes from adds this extra element of appreciation. So here's the big moment. After having the zucchini on my counter for a few days, I finally cut into it, and yeah, it was just great. Sometimes when zucchinis get this big, they can be kind of tough, but this one was actually like really tender still, so I was really happy about that. Zucchini and tomatoes both have a lot of moisture in them, so to draw some of that out, I'm adding on some salt, and I'm just gonna let that sit while I make my other toppings. To season the tarts, I'm also making a garlic and herb oil with some fresh garlic, oregano, and some rosemary. And if you like a little spice in your life, you can also add in some red pepper flakes. I learned this one the hard way, but definitely add in all your ingredients together while it's cold, because adding ingredients with a lot of water in them to hot oil ends explosively, so this is definitely the safer option. To make the tofu ricotta, I'm using a sprouted tofu that has a softer texture, and seasoning with salt, pepper, nutritional yeast, garlic powder, and a bit of cashew milk, but you can use whatever milk you have. After about a half an hour, the dough should be ready to handle, and this dough will make 1 big tart or 5 little mini tarts, which is what I had. So I'm just cutting them into fourths and rolling them out with a rolling pin. A fourth of the dough is going to be a little big for the tart pans, but that's on purpose because we're going to cut the edges and make a really clean, flat edge, and then use the scraps for the 5th tart. So the bottom of the crust doesn't bubble while you bake it, just poke in some holes with a fork. Checking back in on the veggies, you can see that a lot of the water has come out of them, so just dab those off. Our oil should now be done, so I'm seasoning the tofu with it. To get the consistency I want, I'm really just tasting as I go and checking the texture, so I also added a bit more milk. Turning my attention back to the tart crusts, I'm gonna pre-bake them before filling them, so I'm weighing them down with some old grain that I had. This helps the crust not form any bubbles as it bakes. And this is only gonna take about 10 minutes at an oven heated to 375. And now I'm just assembling, layering in my tofu ricotta, followed by the zucchini and some tomatoes. The last thing I add in is that garlic oil, and I add in the whole pieces of garlic and drizzle the oil over the rest of the veggies. These go into an oven heated at 425 for about 20 minutes. Then I pop them out of their tins and top them with some fresh basil. The veggies from the garden were so flavorful, and there were so many nice textures going on, the flaky crust and the creamy tofu. They turned out really good. Our next recipe is a white bean and zucchini gratin, or I would pronounce it gratin, but that's probably not right. And it's basically just brothy beans and veggies with a crispy sourdough breadcrumb topping. I'm starting by prepping my veggies, and I'm using onions, celery, and carrots as the base, and also grating some zucchini, which I salt so the moisture can be drawn out, and then I'm gonna squeeze them and also strain my beans. Usually if everything's seasoned nicely and you still feel like you're missing something from a dish, it's oftentimes acid, so I'm also adding in some fresh tomatoes to this recipe. On the stovetop, I cooked down the onions, celery, and carrots until the onions became translucent, and then I'm gonna add in the rest of my veggies before we bake it. And before baking, I'm also adding in a bouillon cube and some hot water. Usually I'm cooking with more intuition rather than a recipe, so I'm watching for the water as it fills up, and right when I see it, that's when I stop. And then I thoroughly mix in the bouillon and flatten off the top before I add in my breadcrumb. During the pandemic, I got super into baking sourdough, so I had a lot of stale bread at one point, and I was able to make these breadcrumbs. To a tablespoon of melted butter, I sprinkled in a bit of the breadcrumbs and seasoned with salt, pepper, and nutritional yeast. This is a really comforting and homey recipe, and it was really filling, and it only takes about 15 minutes in the oven at 450 degrees. This last recipe could be a breakfast or a dessert, but it's really cakey and fudgy, and it's these oat zucchini brownies. Grind up 2 cups of oats in a food processor or a blender, and you can grind these as fine as you want. The finer, the more cakey it's gonna be. I was having mine for breakfast, so I didn't mind a bit of texture in there, as well as a 1/4 cup of cocoa powder, a tablespoon of flax seeds, a teaspoon of baking powder, and a bit of salt. Here she is, and still going strong. Lots of zucchini to use, and we're gonna just shred a bit of her up. Just like the other recipe, I'm gonna salt the zucchini and wrap it up with a towel and squeeze out as much of the moisture as I possibly can. I have to say, this is a pretty good wrist workout, and the zucchinis always have a lot more water in them than you expect. I'm definitely an advocate for playing with your food. I think it's a really great way to connect with what you're eating and be present in the moment. I think a lot of times we can have a lot of judgment around food and what we eat and what other people are eating. And so it's just a way to be more playful and present in the moment. To the bowl, add in the zucchini, 1/3 cup of peanut butter, 1/2 cup of brown sugar, and a cup of milk and a cup of coffee. I'm using that same cute little cast iron pan, and I'm gonna coat it with coconut oil and then dust it with some cocoa powder so that the batter doesn't stick as it bakes. And about half the batter is gonna fit in here. And I'm also going to be making the same batter in the microwave. So you can do whichever you want. The microwave only takes about 4 minutes and it bakes for about 35. So I think there wasn't much of a difference, and if you want to have that quicker time in the mornings, the microwave is definitely the way to go. I also added in some chocolate chips to the batter, and I'm gonna put some on the top as well so that they get nice and melty. This recipe would be really good for someone who doesn't really like to eat a lot of veggies, because you can't really taste the zucchini in there. It really just adds some extra moisture, and the peanut butter and the chocolate flavors are what really shines through. This was great, served warm, straight out of the microwave or the oven. The chocolate chips got really nice and melty, and it was super fudgy. Thank you all so much for watching today's video, and if you'd like to support my channel and help it grow, please like and subscribe, and please find me on Instagram and let me know what other types of videos you'd like to see.